Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today we have guests from the Institute of International Education. Before we get started, I would like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on our ACRO website within 24 hours. I will also be sure to provide the link in the chat as well. You are welcome to turn on closed captions and ask our guests questions using the Q&A feature. You can ask your questions at any time and you can ask anonymously. And questions will be answered at the end. Without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Julia Funaki, our Director of International Education Services, to introduce our guests. Thank you, Julia. Oh, Julia, you're on mute.
Thank you, Belma. Thank you, Belma, for turning that over. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on international student mobility and trends and the U.S. higher education outlook for 2030. I am Julia Funaki, as Belma told you. Here at ACRO, I work in and direct the international office. I'm delighted and thrilled to introduce to you our esteemed speakers today, Dr. Alan Goodman and Dr. Mirka Martel from the Institute of International Education. As many of you probably know, IIE is a global non-for-profit organization that designs and implements international education strategies and services. Established over 100 years ago, 1919 to be precise, IIE has been at the forefront of advancing international education and access to study abroad opportunities worldwide and has pioneered applied research and policy analysis in the field of international education. IIE manages more than 200 programs with participants from more than 180 countries. In the last year alone, more than 29,000 people participated in IIE managed programs. You will find many other opportunities, and many of you are likely very familiar with their annual Open Doors report and Project Atlas. Dr. Goodman is the Chief Executive Officer at IIE. He is a long-standing and dedicated person in advancing international access and education to study abroad opportunities worldwide. With a distinguished career spanning academia, government, and international affairs, Dr. Goodman brings a wealth of expertise and leadership to IIE. Previously, he served as the Executive Dean of the School of Foreign Service and professor at Georgetown University, and as the President Briefing Coordinator for the Director of Central Intelligence during the Carter administration. Dr. Goodman is a renowned author with several books on international affairs published by prestigious university presses like Harvard University, Princeton, and Yale. Joining Dr. Goodman is Dr. Mirka Martel, the head of research, evaluation, and learning at IIE. Dr. Martel's extensive work in international education leadership and development has contributed significantly to advancing the field's understanding of global student mobility trends. She oversees key resources such as the historic Open Doors I mentioned on international education exchange and the Project Atlas research initiative, providing invaluable insights into the future of academic mobility flows in the United States and worldwide. Her recent publications, including Prospects for International Students Amid Rebounding Global Mobility and Senior International Officers on U.S. Higher Education Campuses, she has co-authored with Dr. Goodman, have garnered recognition within the international education community. I am excited to introduce them to you, and I now turn this over to Dr. Alan Goodman. Dr. Goodman?
Julia, thanks very much. Belma, thanks for all the technique in arranging this, and thanks all for joining. Very early in my Georgetown career, I got to meet our registrar, John Pierce. It was a funny circumstance, but it developed a lifelong friendship and relationship all through my deanship, and also a wonderful way to meet the deans of admissions who we would need from time to time. But most of all, we needed registrar. It happened when an international student came to my office and said he wanted to ask me something very personal and very confidential if I would help him. And you know, when you have that kind of introduction to the meeting, nothing good is going to come of it. So I said, sure. He was on a government scholarship from his home government, and he said the scholarship authorities require me to get a transcript and to send it to the government ministry that's supporting me. And he said he was afraid. Said in his country, when you had to go to the registrar's office, you almost never were able to get in. Then when you saw a clerk, you had to pay a bribe, and then another bribe in order to get the transcript issued. And it often was never issued in time for the deadline you were trying to meet. So we go over from the SFS building to the college where John's office was. He nearly fell off his chair. Later, I learned that no dean had ever visited him. But he also thought this couldn't be good because here I am with a student. Explain the situation. 5 minutes later, free of charge, transcript is processed. And for the next couple of weeks, we had lines of international students showing up because they were afraid, like this student was, to approach the registrar given the way it operated in their countries. A few months ago, I heard Melanie talk about, she wished she had an acronym or a tagline for ACRO. And it sort of stuck with me for a while. And then I realized in preparing for this webinar that it's clear. Your mission are the students. Nobody cares more about the students on a campus really than the registrar and the alliance with the admissions officers. And I got to see you hard at work almost every week at Georgetown, where you did something that was extraordinary, or you helped a faculty member or an admissions committee understand a foreign transcript when we didn't have the expertise ourselves. So a big thank you to those in the profession and those joining it. Now, my commercial for Mirka. In November, we presented the latest Open Doors numbers. And not that Mirka and I have seen this in our lifetime, but there have been 12 pandemics since IIE started collecting data in 1920. We've never seen anything like the aftermath of COVID-19. Usually things are flat for a couple of years, then they inch up to 2% to 3%. We've never seen a rebound that's 8 to 12% in our country and in other countries as well. That was November. December, I began to hear from the heads of the British Council, Universities UK, our counterparts in France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Australia, and Canada, that maybe their numbers were not going to be very good in the future because there was backlash over the number of international students enrolled, housing shortages, rightward shifts in their government, nationalism in their politics, and they were afraid that future Open Doors numbers were going to reflect those trends and were going to go down. I heard them out. I thought it was probably premature. So that was December. In January and February, there were the headlines from Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, France, Germany, talking about international student caps, limits on housing, limits on enrollment. By then, those countries were approaching 25 to 30% international students, whereas we were at 5%. And the news continued to get worse in January, February, and that moved us to say, well, what if our trends continue and other countries are going to have trouble having capacity for international students? What would America look like in 2025 and 2030? And that's why we decided to do Outlook 2030 and track our results and numbers every year till we get there. And the good news is we think that American colleges and universities have a unique opportunity to host not just 1 million international students, but probably close to 2 million. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Martell.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you everyone for joining today and giving us this opportunity to present some of our latest data to you. So what I'll do now is I will just share my screen and share a number of slides that really look at some of the data we have been doing as part of Outlook 2030. And as Julia mentioned, we are really looking to engage in a dialogue with you and to really share with you some of the data, but to also start a conversation. And so please do use the Q&A option to ask us questions during our presentation. We would love to answer them when we're done, and to also engage in a discussion around this topic and around the data I'll be presenting today. So as Alan mentioned, this really was an endeavor for us to think about the current state and the current data we have in front of us, particularly thanks to the Open Doors report on international educational exchange, around current trends that are there regarding international students coming to the United States, and then broader trends around what would it take to really increase significantly international student enrollments in the United States. So again, as Julia mentioned, what I oversee is the Open Doors report on international educational exchange. Many of you may know this report. Some of you may even be the ones who report to this report at your institution. The Open Doors report is a historic reference point for international student mobility to the US and US study abroad. And we are, in fact, this year celebrating our 75th year of this publication, and really celebrating the amount of work that has gone into this on behalf of US colleges and universities, but also the importance of understanding that data on international educational mobility. So what I'm going to start with today is just an overview of where we are in terms of the numbers. So in the past year, what we reported is that there were over 1 million international students studying at US institutions in the United States. Now, this was for the 2022-23 academic year. We release new Open Doors data traditionally every November. So this upcoming November, we will be releasing the newest data on 2023-24. Now, I want to pause here to note a few things, as Alan mentioned. We were really interested and excited to see that the total number of international students was once again above 1 million. Particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a concerted effort to understand whether those international student mobility trends would rebound. And we were so excited to see that there was actually 2 years of increases, 4% the prior year, and then 12% this year, to come back to over 1 million students in the United States. Now, what we also saw was that we are predicting that the 2023-24 academic year will further see an increase. And so as we look forward to November and our 75th anniversary, we're all actually also waiting to see whether that number will continue to increase. Now, when we look at those numbers going up, what we actually see is a bit of a changing picture in the landscape of international students in the US. What we have seen, for example, is a large increase in the total number of international students in the US pursuing graduate degrees, so master's or doctorate degrees. This, a few years ago, actually became the higher number between this and undergraduate students. And actually, the total number of graduate students in the US was the highest last year. And we expect again to see another increase this year, meaning that those graduate numbers will continue to increase. We also saw a flattening of that undergraduate student degree number. We have seen some decreases here, particularly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have seen a flattening in this trend. Now, we also saw an increase in optional practical training, or OPT. Many of you know that this is the welcome opportunity for international students to stay in the United States for up to 3 years after they finish their academic degree. And after 3 years of decreases, this number actually turned around to be an 8% increase. And we also saw increases in other academic levels, such as non-degree. So in total, all of our academic levels increased, but we have been seeing and following an overall increase in international students pursuing graduate degrees. What we also saw is that our top 3 places of origin of students continued to be China, India, and South Korea, but we did see some differences here. For example, we saw a strong increase in international students from India this past year, whereas the total number of international students from China remained relatively flat. When we span out, we do continue to see that among the top 25 places of origin, we saw some emerging international student markets. And when you look at these countries, you not only see that there are international students represented from all continents, but what you also see, and what we noted, is that some of these markets are growing quite rapidly. So we have international students from places like Nigeria, Nepal, Vietnam, and other locations that are growing at quite increasing rates. And for us, what that means is that it's incredibly important for us to continue to consider all of these different places of origin in terms of international student recruitment. And if we span out even further, what we see is that we actually each year host international students in the United States from over 200 places of origin. Finally, the last thing we also saw were in terms of fields of study was that we have been continuing to see an increase in international students pursuing math and computer science degrees, as well as engineering degrees. But what I also want to note here is that there continues to be a diversity in terms of the fields of study pursued by international students. So for example, we actually saw numbers going up in all of these fields of study, and that continues to be a priority as well in terms of looking ahead to where we are recruiting international students and for what fields. We also note the incredibly important contribution that international students have to the US economy. And in fact, in 2022, international students contributed over $40 billion to the US economy. So that's a little bit of a look at the current state. As Alan mentioned, what we began to see, or we have been seeing, is a strong increase in international students coming to the United States. So a desire for international students to continue to look at the US as their destination, as well as a diversity in terms of where students are coming from, what degree they are studying for, and what fields of study they are interested in. So to Alan's point, we then decided to look ahead. And that's when Outlook 2030 comes in. We decided to look at several different factors in terms of where numbers may go, both globally and in the United States, in the next 5 years or so. So one of the things we've been noticing is that the total pie of students who are globally mobile is growing. In the 2023 year, according to UNESCO, the total number of students who were globally mobile, meaning they crossed a border to pursue a higher education degree, was at about 6.4 million. And this number has continued to increase since the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, what we see is that by 2030, this number could expand well above 10 million. It also means that there are more destinations where international students are going to need to look. Now, the United States has traditionally been the #1 host of international students in the world, and that continues to be the case. And in 2023, according to Project Atlas, we had about 17% of the share of all international students that are globally mobile. So as we continue to see this pie getting bigger, we are going to need to consider where those international students are going to be going. The reason we see this pie getting bigger is because we see demographic trends. We see the need that international students and students of tertiary age population in many parts of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Asia, continue to grow. At the same time, many of these locations do not have a domestic higher education system that is set up or prepared to be able to have the capacity to serve all of these students. And finally, what we're seeing is that in many of these emerging international student markets, economies are going up and expanding, meaning there are more families with a medium income that may be able to afford international education priorities. As a result, the confluence of these 3 factors continues to show us the evidence that we expect that international student global mobility will continue to expand, and therefore students will continue to look outside of their borders for a higher education. But we also now need to look at the supply side. So if we know that there will be a demand of international students who are going to be looking to study outside of their borders, where will they go? And that's when we decided to do an analysis of capacity in all of our top host countries, and really looking at how many higher education institutions are in those systems, in the top host systems, and then how are international students fitting into that higher education enrollment total. Now, what you see here, and what we've been noticing over time, particularly in the past few years, is that while the United States maintains a large capacity for international students in its higher education system, other top hosts are beginning to run out of room. So for example, you see here that the UK, which is second on the list, Canada and Australia are beginning to reach capacity of 20 to 30%. That means that in those countries, 1 in every 5 students or 1 in every even 3 students is an international student. That begins to put pressure on these higher education systems in terms of housing, in terms of enrollment, in terms of capacity to really host these students. As a result, and as Alan mentioned, what we've actually seen more recently is all of these other host countries beginning to pull back in terms of their international student enrollments, and actually, if anything, putting up barriers or caps for the number of international students they will be able to welcome in the future. That really means that the United States, in contrast, is one of the few that actually has the capacity, with our close to 4,000 US colleges and universities, to host even more international students. So when we're thinking about this topic, we also want to consider all of the different criteria. And you know this well, as you are registrars or admissions officers, that we're constantly also thinking about whether institutions are able and ready to take on these international students. So last fall, we did another thing. We went to all of the US colleges and universities that fill out open doors, and through the fall 2023 snapshot, we asked them, would you be willing and interested to take on more international students than you currently do? And that was a resounding yes. Over 90% of the institutions noted that they're interested in increasing this enrollment of international students over the next 5 years. We also note in the Outlook 2030 brief, and we welcome you to, of course, read it, that many institutions and the overall US higher education system is facing a demographic cliff. This means that over the next few years, the total domestic higher education enrollment is set to go down. So it means that many of these institutions, including yours, of course, are thinking about how they're going to fill seats in their institutions. And as a result, international students could be a natural fit to welcome to improve these enrollment numbers. So we put a call to action, and that's where I'll end, and we can begin our discussion and our questions. And that was really, what would it take? So we begin to ask, what would it take if we were to double the total number of international students at US colleges and universities by 2030? And we've put in 3 different scenarios in our brief around what would it take to get to 2 million. We would need to significantly increase our international student enrollments. We would also need to significantly come together as a higher education community to ensure that there are less barriers for some of these international students. And we would also need to, of course, look at our different international student markets. We decided to look at some of the different scenarios that different institutions could look at, really increasing enrollment. Institutions that already have a high number of international students may be incrementally increasing their total numbers. Others who have less, potentially doubling that number, and what would that take? And then finally, also adding more institutions who currently don't host international students and making sure that international students are now welcome to their campus. So there are many different efforts that are already happening, including the US for Success Coalition that IIE is a founding member of, that are really bringing together these advocacy efforts and speaking to US colleges and universities and thinking about the more practical realities that we all face. But we also came to the realization that if we ask this big question, what would it take? The resounding answer we get is that everybody is interested, and really what we need to get to are those practical discussions of how we could actually significantly increase those enrollments. So with that, I'm going to finish my part of the slide deck. This slide deck will be available to you afterwards, so you will have the information here for the full report. And we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mertel and Dr. Goodman. Very interesting information, and I really hope our participants pop in with some questions or comments on how they see their institution as fitting into this and where they might be in that last slide that you shared. I'm going to start us off with a question, and that's simply to say, how could U.S. institutions leverage international student enrollment to greater enhance their overall campus diversity and provide a more global sort of learning experience for all their learners?
And we of course hope that all campuses will want to do that, because so few Americans have a passport, so few Americans still study abroad. It'll be probably years before we get close to 500,000 Americans studying abroad. So how are we going to learn about the world unless we're sitting next to students from 5 or 6 different countries, working on papers with them, discussing and arguing in class? I think we're fortunate to have the room, the space. We'll have more room and more space come 2025, but it's a real service to our students to US students to bring international students here, because so few study abroad.
Yeah, I would say from the data angle, what we're also seeing is potentially the hope for that diversity in terms of places of origin, Julia. And I think that that's what we've been focusing on a lot, ensuring that international students are not just coming from China and India, but that institutions are actually focusing on other regions and places of origin and diversifying the cohort of international students they have on their campus. There's so many benefits to that. We've visited institutions that specifically focus on certain regions or are looking at links that they can have, for example, even to their domestic diaspora populations. And all of those are great opportunities to really think about how those international students are going to fit into the fabric of your campus and enrich the campus through diversity, but also other cultural means.
And I think if we pursue this, you'll find on your campus, your mayor, your economic development commission, your governor, they're really interested in the impact these students have. And when the students go home, they're the way the South Carolinas, the Texas, the cities of Miami of the world have friends in the places the students they educated went home to. So it pays a dividend both over time and over geography.
Indeed, and I would put a plug in right here, right now for NASA's economic value tool, for just seeing the impact that can have on a region, on a city, on a state, as something that's very convincing information to bring forth to your leadership at your institution. I'm going to relate this to what you just talked about with one more question, then we have another question in the Q&A. But what strategies would you recommend for institutions looking to expand their international recruitment efforts in emerging markets, especially beyond those traditional top countries of origin that we always see? Any thoughts there?
So maybe I can. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead, Ellen.
Go ahead, Mirka, please.
Well, I will talk about one of our most amazing networks, which is the Education USA network. I have now done several presentations with them. I have focused with them on different world regions. So at conferences, for example, at the latest NAFSA, we did a session on with Education USA on international students from the Middle East. And we paired Open Doors data with Karen Bauer, who is the REAC in Education USA for the Middle East, to really, and two institutions, to really talk about recruitment in that region. Education USA is just an incredible tool for any institution, any US college or university. And as I don't want to take Alan's words, but as Alan sometimes says, send all your things to Education USA, because the more that they know about your institution, the more that they know about your institution's interest to host international students from different regions, the better they will be able to connect you to institutions in their countries or in their regions. And the better that they will be able to connect you to prospective international students. So Education USA, I think, is an amazing resource, and all international student offices should be reaching out to Education USA, to all of the REACs in the different regions, especially regions you are interested to expand your international recruitment to.
And I just add to that I think in this new era of opportunity and constraints elsewhere, that admissions officers maybe need to have a foreign policy. And it's extend beyond China, India, and South Korea. And this is a really great time to look at the demographics, to look at the constraints in the 20 largest developing countries with the largest middle classes. Maybe to be more intentional about, or focus on just a region, but all of the countries in the region and not just the biggest and the wealthiest. So I think foreign policies need always to be refreshed in the light of new challenges and new opportunities.
I will also say that what works a lot in international student recruitment, and we've heard it more and more as we've looked at different regions, is really your institution deciding what its strategy is for international students. So to Alan's point, really thinking about what is the connection that you have to international students from different places. That's why in Open Doors, you can look at where international students are coming from, but also at what degree and for what fields of study. How do those fields of study connect to your institution? The more that you make those level of linkages, the more that prospective international students will feel like there is a natural fit to your institution particularly. And I think where we've seen those linkages done very well, where we've seen stories shared around how international students from Peru or Ecuador actually fit into an institution's needs or diversity, or I think that those specific strategies can really be very successful.
Indeed, and I'm going to just jump on and add to that with Education USA. One is such a valuable resource. And, every ACRO meeting, for those of you that come, we usually have 2 to 3 Education USA officers presenting on a region, presenting on a country, and always available and so willing to help and really kind of hear about your institution and take that information back. And I would also say, talking about a strategy and having a vision and a strategy for your office on thinking about recruiting and retaining your international students, one of the things ACRO is very big on is strategic enrollment management. And if you don't include the international student, the international learner and scholar into that, you're really missing a huge chunk of what can really make your institution stand out. So let's go to the question I want to make sure we get to the questions from the participants, and please add in more questions, you all. This question is, what do you suggest, and this is a very real issue, what do you suggest to help assist students early on who may face visa challenges?
I'm partly as a result of the NAFSA panel, but partly as a result of what's been bothering me. I'm writing a short paper on fraud. The 800-pound gorilla or elephant in the room at NASA was everyone was talking about visa denials, and mainly in Africa. And nobody was talking about fraud, which is a reality in the visa world, which is highly skilled. The fraudsters are. Increasingly wealthy students have the ability to hire people to do their paperwork for them, and they fail the visa interview because they have no idea why they're wanting to study astrophysics. So I think we can be proactive, and part of this paper I'm writing will say, well, what can you do now to the students you're reaching out to? Remind them about Education USA, remind them that the visa application needs to be their own work. Remind them that as much as they might want to stay in the United States for the rest of their lives, the visa officer is not interested in that, and that doesn't help. What they want to know is, I want to get my degree, it's in a field I can study in, and I intend to return home. So there's a lot of coaching that I think we can be giving students, especially in high visa denial areas of the world, to make sure, especially that they don't get taken in by the fraud and the agents that pretend to think they can get them a visa interview and they can fill out the form in just the right way. I don't quite know how to calibrate that advice yet. I'm hoping when I release the paper, a lot of people on this call will say, well, add this to it, add that to it. But I think we're going to have to be very, very guiding of our students applying so that they make legitimate applications and don't get tempted by the fraud and the agents that are out there masquerading as being helpful.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, certainly visa and consular services is part of the equation. We can't double the numbers from some of these places of origin if we don't have enough consular officers and we don't have enough training for these. So certainly what goes into that is also the advocacy and the training that we've been doing as part of the US for Success Coalition or other areas and other organizations that we're working with. I will also say that a lot of those preparation materials is another thing that Education USA advisors do. So there is a lot that is being done in terms of resources for international students very, very early on. In many of these places, specifically Sub-Saharan Africa, Education USA advisors have different resources to also do mock interviews and mock visa interviews so that students are prepared and so that they can also hear, to Alan's point, how really to answer that questions. And that's not to prime them for how to answer the questions, but also to be realistic about what consular offices and consular officers are sometimes looking for in terms of the intention of the student who is looking to come study in the US.
Thanks, Mirka. Thanks, Dr. Goodman. So I have another question that's popped up here, and I think this is a very good one. Has IIE's research extended into the effect of safety concerns on undergraduate enrollment of international students in the US? Or graduate enrollment, for that matter?
Yeah, this is a great point. We get this question all the time, and I will definitely say that it is a major factor in the US. This is not data that is covered by the Open Doors report, but it is data that we collect as part of the fall snapshot. So I mentioned the fall snapshot and the question we asked last fall. Every fall, we do a snapshot survey, and every spring, we do a snapshot survey that asks institutions about international student and study abroad issues on their campuses. And every fall, we ask them, what is behind the increases you're seeing and the decreases you're seeing? And certainly safety is one of the factors. The one thing I will start with is that by and large, what we see is safety is a factor. It is not the only factor. So there are other factors that prospective international students are really focusing on. When it comes to the US, it is safety, it is also cost. So I think that we always see a combination of factors, with safety, of course, being one of them. The other thing when we ask institutions, colleges and universities, how they really deal with the safety issue is really understanding what safety looks like on your campus. So what we've heard from colleges and universities is that oftentimes, of course, international students are hearing headlines and are hearing news stories from the United States as a whole. But the United States, of course, we all know, is such a large place. And so what colleges and universities have been doing to really prioritize communication about safety with international students is to talk to them about the location that they are in, where they are located, what that looks like, what safety looks like, and how it is prioritized on their campus. So I guess I would answer that from the data angle. Yes, we currently do see that it is a factor, though other factors, including cost, are always kind of higher priority. And then what we also hear anecdotally from colleges and universities is that really the strategy to focus on safety, which is important, is to also ensure that international students and their parents, because especially for undergraduate students, that is critical, that parents are brought into the discussion, that they understand a little bit more about the US education system, institutions in the US, where they're located, and what safety looks like more locally, whether it's within a state, whether it's within a county.
Excellent. Okay, I have one more that I'd like to pose. With the increasing diversity of international student populations, how can institutions effectively support and foster an inclusive environment for students from various cultural backgrounds? And I'm going to just extend this to say, for those of you who are participating, please feel free to put comments on this if you've done anything into the chat. I think we'd all love to see that.
The good news about that question is it's not a new question.
Mm-hmm.
We actually know how to have a more inclusive campus, how to keep from creating a Chinese ghetto or an Indian ghetto. We know a lot about how to assign rooming assignments and dormitories. We know a lot about the mental stresses that international and US students are under. And it's not like we have to invent a new science. It's not like we have to learn new lessons. We just have to apply what we already know. And that's why I think it may be easier than any of us suspect to double the number of international students, because we already know how to do this. We're rated as the top country in the world for the quality of our higher ed institutions and the diversity of our higher ed institutions. We know how to orient international students when they come. We have foreign student advisors. We're going to need more of them, just as we need more mental health professionals. But it's not rocket science anymore, and it's something we're all into.
I think one of the things I always learn when I'm learning about other education systems and other host education systems is thinking and reflecting back on how much US colleges and universities do when it comes to inclusivity and student services, and the extent that they really make it a priority. I will say that I think what we've seen from our snapshot surveys, or even when we did the COVID-19 surveys, was that particularly during the pandemic and after, many colleges and universities took a second look at the support they're offering to their students. We did a specific report on mental health and really the support and services that were being provided for international students around mental health. And it was incredible, because one of the things we saw is, yes, more can be done. Yes, more resources need to be put on this, but many campuses were treating international students just like any other student. And that's what we heard from a lot of colleges and universities, that that these students are the students that we have, and we support all students on our campus. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity for to prioritize this, to continue to prioritize this, but also to consider, really considering how that campus comes together when it comes to both international students and US students.
Indeed, and as I mentioned in the chat, I don't even want to talk about how many years ago. I'm sure before Dr. Goodman was at Georgetown, we were talking about this when I was a graduate student of in cross-cultural and international communication of how to do this. So it is indeed out there. It's up to us to make sure it gets played out on a daily basis. So, any other questions from the audience?
I'd be particularly interested people get in touch with us after the call. If you're hearing about visa denials in different places beyond what's in the headline, beyond Nigeria, let us know, because between NAFSA, the Coalition for Success, IIE, ACRO, there may be ways we can rebring this to the attention of the Consular Bureau in Washington and consulates abroad, because part of what we're doing in this briefing for them is to say, get ready. You're going to need more consular officers. And you can't just manufacture them overnight. Get ready for the places that are going to have increased demand. It's not just India and China. And we have a couple of years to plan, which is the good thing.
Agreed. The Coalition for Success, absolutely. Get in touch. Let us know, because you know what we're doing is we're trying to bring this forward on behalf of all of you and your institution. So the more we can do together, the more impact it will undoubtedly have. So together we're stronger on this. I would like to just encourage everybody once again. IIE's information is only as good as your willingness to fill out the surveys. So please, when those come, make sure that you take them and you fill them out. And if you're not the right person, make sure they get to the right people, because this information is always so valuable to us in each year that we're looking at it, and for telling us what our direction is and what's going on our campuses specifically. So with that, Velma, would you bring out our few closing slides? And once again, as Dr. Martell said, and I will repeat again, that this recording will be saved by ACRO and the slide deck will be shared. So we thank you for that as well. Velma, do we have the rest of the slides? If not, I will talk through them.
We sure do.
Wonderful, wonderful. We can go on the next one. These are just some ACRO announcements. You have about 11 days left to apply for the Baden-Württemberg seminar. Applications are being taken right now. This is such a wonderful opportunity with the ministry, NAFSA, and ACRO working together to take applications for the seminar, which will be held in October 20th to the 26th. It's going to be in Stuttgart, University, Stuttgart, Germany this year. Just a great chance for you to learn about the German education system, academic comparability, the different types of institutions that are out there in Germany. You will learn so much. If you ever come to our Edge user group, you know that many of our IESC members will tell you how wonderful this experience is. The next thing is we want you to stay in touch. How can you stay in touch? ACRO has their new exchange groups. Existing Google groups such as the International Activities groups have been closed, and they are now part of the ACRO exchange. It's just really a great way to communicate with communities that you might be very interested, whether it's small colleges, international activities, etc. You log in using the same credentials you use for all of your ACRO web-based services. And last but not least, we are opening up the IESC Fellowship. The IESC Fellowship is the International Education Standards Council, IESC, where we bring in 2 fellows each year to study a research topic. It's a good chance for you to really be mentored by people who are been in the field and have just a wealth of expertise and experience to share with you. It gives you an opportunity to present a webinar and a conference presentation and to get published in AcroConnect, and we will also publish the research project. So another great opportunity for you. And with that, I would like to once again thank Dr. Goodman and Dr. Martell for their wonderful work and willingness to share in this topic with us and with our community. Wishing you a good day, and we hope to see you on the next webinar.